Media.
We're gonna start the music here and let everybody in.
Hello and good evening, everybody, and welcome to the VBC Scuttlebutt. I'm Todd DiPastino, director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We've been getting veterans together with the public for 16 years, and we do it every Monday night at 7 p.m. here, live stream to YouTube, also here on Zoom. And tonight is open conversation. And the idea is, you bring the topic, you bring the subject, and we provide the platform. Certainly, I've brought some subjects and guests and topics tonight to talk about. But what we're after really is the military experience, past and present. We want to educate the public about what serving in the armed forces is like, and we also want to give veterans and others who have lived in the military community a platform to share their experiences. Because there's one thing, I've not lived in the military community. I'm not a veteran. Neither is my right-hand man here, Sean Hall. Hello, Sean.
Good evening, everybody.
Neither Sean nor I is a veteran, and we are extremely curious about the life in the military and the lasting impact the military service makes on people. Is something that has captivated me literally for 16 years. I mean, I quit my job to work in the veterans community and hear these stories and collect these stories and gather them and share them. And boy, have I grown in knowledge, and I like to think some maturity and wisdom and a lot of character lessons over the past 16 years. So I want to thank all the veterans who so kindly spend their time with us and share the stories that maybe aren't easy to share. Maybe it's not easy to explain all the time, the kind of experiences that you have in the military. So I want to thank everybody who kind of makes our programming possible. Um, we have open conversation tonight. I've asked a few people to come on to share some stories, but before we get on with the stories, I do want to wish one of our members here, a very important member, Donn, a happy 74th birthday. Donn, happy birthday to you. 74 years old.
Well,
Happy birthday, Donn.
thank you very much. That's very kind of you to acknowledge that. And it's been quite a ride for 74 years, and I look forward to as many more years to come.
Okay, well, here's a picture of you, Donn. How old were you here?
I was about 19.
What would you tell that 19-year-old if you had it? You were 19 years old.
Yeah.
What would you
Yes.
tell him?
What would I tell him? I would say, young man, learn how to behave yourself,
Uh-oh.
um, but don't stop having a good time, number one. And number two, learn more and listen more. I was a little bit chippy when I was a 19-year-old coming from McKeesport. We had that swag about us.
Yeah.
And it didn't do me any harm, but I think I could have done better keeping my eyes open and my mouth shut.
Well, boy, isn't that one of life's great lessons for all of us? Hopefully we all learn it at some point that, you've got to kind of like put yourself out there, get knocked down a few pegs so that you could go out with a little bit more season next time.
Yeah, and again, thank you very much. It's very kind to acknowledge that. We're doing good and looking forward to today's show. And hopefully, we'll learn something from our sailors today about Operation Linebacker 2. I remember it very well. And this is something that I look forward to, and I know many others do also.
You posted this picture on Facebook today and you said this, courtesy of Mary Klepper. Thank you, Mary, for passing this along to me. Just out of A school. Did not get salty until 2 years later. Had 3 rows fruit salad. Okay, so let's break this down. Just out of A school. What is A school?
A school is the assigned next step after recruit training. If you're fortunate to get an A school, that's the basic um, oh, educational process. It's like going to high school, if you will. It's a graduation from grade school to high school. And you learn your trade. I learned how to be a communicator, a radioman, it was called. And you just learn various things, and you're ready to go out to the fleet when you're done with that. Now, afterwards, there's a B school and a C school where you get more specialty training. But A school gives you the general knowledge within your rate to perform your duties in the fleet.
Does A stand for anything?
I just think it's the beginning of the alphabet, the beginning of the school structure, because it's A, B, and C school. I don't think there's a D, E, and F. I've never heard of that, but I know C school, for example, might be teletype repairman. So when you go to the fleet, you're a teletype repairman. That's your job. So it's a specialty, and it's something that is earned. You have to do well in A school. It's something that wasn't the most arduous thing that I've ever done, but it was in Bainbridge, Maryland from January till April of 1971, and we had quite a large group of radiomen. They were sending a lot of guys and women out to duty. The women, of course, could not serve at sea or in a combat role at that time. The women went to Washington D.C. and worked in the admiral's office or in a captain's office and such. But they carried their weight. They were good radiomen. They were good teammates, and I was proud to serve with them.
Do all sailors go to A school?
No, you might just go as an undesignated sailor and go to the fleet, and that most likely will put you on the deck force where you're chipping paint, doing the maintenance on the ship. It's a harder job, but as you're not designated, you can select a trade. For example, you can be it's called a striker. You can strike to be a radioman. So on your off-duty time, you would go to the communications center, start asserting yourself with the radioman there and say, "Hey, I'd like to learn what you're doing. Can you help me?" And then after a certain progression, you would able to take the test for a radioman and get your rate at that time.
You know, one of our Army veterans, World War II veterans, 99-year-old Warren Goss, recently said to me, and it's first time I've known Warren a long time, first time he's ever said this. He said, if I had to do it over again, I would have joined the Navy. And I asked him why, and he said, because I think I would have learned something.
Yeah.
He didn't
Yeah.
learn much in the Army except how to pull a trigger and stay
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the Navy, I think it prides itself as other services do, but uh, we have a job to do. You're at sea. As in the Marine Corps, every Marine's a rifleman. In the Navy, every sailor is a fireman. And you just learn different things. You learn how to work together as a team, as all servicemen do. And it was an experience that certainly I wouldn't trade for anything. But sometimes I just wish that I don't want to say I applied myself. I did well, but sometimes I got a little into myself, probably a little bit too much. And you look back on that as a more mature adult now, I could say, what the hell were you doing, man? But back then, all my buddies would say, man, we had a good time. Wasn't it a lot of fun? So I think it's just a trait of becoming more mature at 74 years old, as opposed to 19 coming in as a young man.
Totally a trait of youth.
Yes, it did.
Then you said did not get salty until 2 years later. What does getting salty mean?
Well, getting salty, I went to sea then. My first duty station was the
Got it.
naval communication stations within Southeast Asia. So you're standing on the land. And I volunteered knowing that the Constellation was going to run up, do a tour up in Vietnam. And I wanted to be involved with that, of course. And that's when I got salty, when I went to sea and became a shellback. And we did our thing at sea, and you learn some lessons too. And I had a very comfortable environment at a communication station, and you're at sea and you're in Iraq with six other guys within an arm's length of you, and you learn to adapt. And you learn to be more tolerant of each other, and you learn to be friends with each other. Again, I lost a real good buddy of mine, as I mentioned before, but we were very, very good friends, and we both served together on a communication station and on the Constellation. So it was something that I'm glad I did it that way. I could have been comfortable and stayed in the Philippines, but I opted to volunteer and serve my country in the way I did.
What an adventure for a young man. 19, 20 years old, and you're out at sea, and wow, what exposure. And then somebody commented on Facebook here that they commented on your Gee Dunk ribbon.
Yeah, my key dunk ribbon, that's the National Defense Ribbon, and that's the ribbon that's issued on to everyone right out of basic training.
Okay. All right. So you graduate basic training, you get one of those ribbons.
Every military person is issued that as the National Defense Ribbon.
But then when you go to sea, you get salty, you come back. Then you said you had 3 rows of fruit salad.
Yeah, we were the Constellation was somewhat heavily decorated with some presidential unit citations, sea medals, and some other things. But so I was eligible for those, having served on a Constellation.
That's great. Well, happy birthday, Donn. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
spending your birthday night with us.
Well, that's very kind. I couldn't think of any group I'd rather be with.
We're honored to have you.
That's very
Hey,
kind.
Sean and I are busy. I just did some math. We have 7 events coming up in the next 11 days. So we are spending a lot of time preparing for events. Some of them are online, some of them are in person. We have a big event coming up at the Rivers Casino here in Pittsburgh. I just checked our tally, and I think we're at 450 people. We're about sold out for that event on Wednesday morning here. And then we're coming back here Thursday night online at 7 p.m. Glenn Flickinger will be hosting Greatest Generation Live. And this is one that I absolutely will want to see because it's about how World War II navigators navigated the vast distances they needed to go to get to their targets and drop their payloads and come back home. My understanding is, and I'm not sure this is true, maybe Bob von Bargen can clarify or confirm or deny. I don't think there were iPhones back in 1944, 1945. I don't think there was GPS. I could be wrong about that. I think they had to figure it out the hard way. I don't know how they did it. Had to do with the stars and this. I don't know how they did it. I mean, it's like, how did Columbus get across the ocean blue? You know, I can't imagine the the intellectually demanding job of navigation, especially under fire. So we're going to talk about that on Thursday night, or Glenn is going to talk about that. Bob von Bargen, who himself was an Air Force navigator, will be one of our experts commenting. And we'll also have Harry Crosby, the famous Harry Crosby. His daughter, Rebecca, will be on. Harry was featured as one of the main characters in Masters of the Air, the Apple Plus TV series. And Mike Faley, also, who is the historian for the 100th Bomb Group. He'll be on. They'll all be talking about navigation. Bob, how did you do navigation? I mean, was it like, back in the old days, the shadows and sun and wind?
I had one of those hats that went like so in a wand.
I mean, I've always imagined navigation as very demanding. You need a lot of skills and high concentration.
It took a lot of work, and sometimes you wondered what was going on. It's the story of the B-17 navigator is very interesting. I think the folks will find this session going to be very, very interesting.
I think, yeah, I certainly will. Because I've been long curious about it. You went to navigation school when, Bob?
1959.
Okay, so by then there had been some great advances in navigation.
We had some of the older equipment, and I went to school with some of the older equipment, and I can appreciate what Harry Crosby was up against, and probably even more so the navigators in the follow-on airplanes, the wing airplanes, where if you couldn't see the ground, you were in a world of hurt.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll be talking about all of that on Thursday night, 7 p.m. That's November 7th. Please join us if you can. Now I would like to introduce John McBrearty. Is that how you pronounce your name? You have kind of a challenging last name, deceptively challenging last name to pronounce because it's McBrearty, right?
Yeah.
How do you say it in Scottish?
They used to kill that name in boot camp. Oh
What were you called in boot camp?
Well, I was a platoon guide in the Marine Corps boot camp, Paris Island. So it was guard, guard, that guy. I hear it in my sleep till this day.
So what is a platoon guide in Marine boot camp?
Platoon guide is the leader of the recruits. You're like the HMFIC, the head dude.
Yes.
Every time somebody screws up, they go to the guide. It's your fault. Swear that private away. And I had Sea Cadet training prior to enlisting in the Marine Corps. So I already had military experience. I had a year of military college, the Valley Forge Military Academy. So I had a one-up on everybody there. And then I was really into exercise, PT. So I knew what was going on day one. So the drill instructors leaned on me, you know, to square away the platoon, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So John, you were one of these gung-ho recruits in the Marine Corps, huh?
Oh, I went in, my first PT test was a perfect score, 300. When I left, it was 300. I mean, you know, it was like, I prepared my whole, you know, high school Sea Cadets for that, you know, and then going on becoming an officer, you know, but I wanted to start as an enlisted guy. They call him a Mustang. And it's been said that they can be the better of the officers. And I think there's some truth to that. But
so you do think there's truth to that? To somebody, there is truth that that kind of having served in the enlisted ranks does make you a better officer.
I think every individual is different, but as a whole, as a populace, I would have to agree.
So you entered the Marine Corps, I'd say, I'm thinking in the mid 80s, late 80s.
Oh, God bless you. I was 70s. I just missed Vietnam. Yeah.
70s.
Late 70s, yeah. And I missed Vietnam by my age, by just about a couple of years. And then I was in the Cold War. So in my you know, I've gotten into writing. Obviously, I'm retired from the military, 32 years of service. I have an active duty retirement. And I was going to, you want me to get into my story?
Well, yeah. Let me let people know that Colonel Mack, as I call you, you've written many books. You're another one of our prolific authors, who we have on. The ones that interest me the most are your combat essays and your combat journals. And we took an excerpt from your combat journal, and you were very gracious in allowing us to reprint it in this fall's VBC magazine. So if you want to read a bit about Colonel Mack's experiences in Iraq in 2004, you were there for, you know, the great militia uprisings, the insurgencies, Sunni and Shia in Iraq, and it's a wonderful account of that. Daria Summers here is our managing editor of our magazine, and she and I were very much taken with the story, and you were again generous enough to allow us to print it. So you're a prolific author. You're now retired from the military. You write a lot about your combat or about your military experience and how it helps you to understand history better. You started out as a Marine. How many years did you spend in the Marine Corps?
Basically had 10 years in the Marine Corps in break of service, because in the 90s they had the reduction in force, RAF, and a lot of guys were downsized. I was one of those. Got a discharge notice in the mail. I was shocked. So I had friends that had 14 years active duty. They were solid officers. Airborne Ranger, gone, downsized the military in the 90s. And you know, Bill Clinton had something to do with that. Long story short, the National Guard came knocking at my door a couple of years later. And I had been in the airborne. I was airborne qualified. I'd been a captain in the Marine Corps. My roommate in college was Special Forces. So I said, you know, we're always competing with each other. And I said, well, you know, I'm kind of interested in that Special Forces, and I'm airborne, so I'll give it a shot. So long story short, it took like 2 years to do the paperwork to get into the Guard, which was a red flag. You know, I was like, you know what I mean? It was like, how long does it take? I had a clean record, clean background, whatever. You know, I wasn't an ex-convict or nothing. So 2 years. So they call me up and they say, okay, we're ready to swear you in. So they bring me in, and it's like, okay, Sergeant McBrearty, raise your right hand and swear you in. And I said, time out. I said, wait a minute. I said, Sergeant McBrearty, I'm the captain of the Marine Corps. He goes, yeah, well, you Special Forces, we don't have any openings for captains. You're gonna be a sergeant. I said, well, screw you. Put me in anything. I'm a captain. So they put me in the infantry and the cavalry, and like I said, the rest is history.
So I'm gonna ask Brad Washabaugh, fellow Marine, here to unmute. He has a question for you, but um, I'm gonna go out and boldly say you were one of those guardsmen who came from the Marine Corps, airborne qualified, and drove everybody in the National Guard crazy.
Is that for me?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this story before
Well, I'll
of
tell
those
you,
who spend,
there's
years in the
a-
Marine Corps, and they bring that intensity
Yeah,
to
there's
the California National Guard, and it
a
just doesn't
lot
always
of
translate.
Marines in the Guard because the Marines are a very small club. And there's attrition left and right and body weight, PT.
Yeah.
There's so many reasons that they have to narrow in. It's a very, small pyramid at the top. For example, for me to participate in the Marine Corps Reserve when I came off active duty, I was an Amtrak officer. I was in California. The nearest unit for me to go to drill was in Florida. And they would expect you to go hop on a flight on your own dime. So it's really hard to, I mean, the Marine Corps is small. Okay?
Yeah.
Army big, and so opportunity for guys like me. I ended up in the Active Guard Reserve, which is the AGR program. So that's like the Marine Corps INI. I was active duty in the National Guard. It was best kept, I put my autobiography, best kept secret in the military. Because I didn't have to leave the state so much. I deployed a lot. I was all over the place. I lived out of a suitcase, but I got to buy a home, invest in real estate, and other benefits to it. And again, I got my active duty retirement, but I do have a video clip that kind of tells my story.
Okay.
And it's like 2.5 minutes. And if it comes through on share screen, if you can't hear or something, let me know and I can stop it.
Okay. Let's do that. Let's run that, and then we can go to Brad.
Okay, we'll go to share screen.
Go to share
It
screen
tells the whole story.
and make sure that you are able to share your sound also.
Yeah.
When you-
Oh, here we go. I'll go right to this one. Sure.
Cal Army veteran who spent decades serving our country has chronicled his days fighting the war in Iraq, but they're not the stories you might expect.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
Shared with other veterans.
We're almost at the halfway point of our deployment, and I think that this is a good opportunity for reflection.
It's not coming through very clearly.
They are Lieutenant Colonel John McBrearty's words, serving our country in Iraq. He's now retired from the U.S. Army after serving 32 years and lives in Riverside.
I can't hear it, John.
Can I hear it?
No. It's
started
very
off well. It started off well, but then as soon as went into the interview, we basically dropped audio almost.
It's
almost like a whisper.
garbled. Yeah, it's garbled.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, so you want me to stop the video?
Yeah, why don't you stop it?
Okay.
I love here Bob Von Bargen says it's guys like John who converted the National Guard from being the raggedy ass militia into the combat ready force of today.
If you can share the link, we can Todd or I might be able to pull it up.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll share the link when the next speaker comes on. I'll put the links on. I put my contact link in there.
Okay.
Also, they were talking. You can Google me or go to that's on YouTube. There's 3 different CBS segments. They've been gracious enough to cover my books. These are my books. How much more time do I have, Todd?
Well, let's talk for another 10 minutes or so.
Oh, okay. That telecast was about the combat essays book. I think you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
It's easy reading. It's only 117 pages. A lot of pictures, and I like maps. What is it about soldiers and Marines? We love maps. All my books got a bunch of maps. Anyway, it's little vignettes. Each story is only like 2 or 3 pages, and there are letters I wrote home, letters to the editor, newspapers and told our little story, what we were doing. And a lot of what we did was civil military operations. So like I say in my books, the Combat Journal series, I said, this is not your typical blood and guts war
Right.
story. My story is a humanistic story. It tells of a guy, Major Hillcrest, which was me. I had to change the names to, to protect the identity of soldiers and, respect the privacy and the units. So I changed the names, but I'm the main character and I narrate the story. And it's a real humanistic story because the amount of pressure and stress that was put on this officer, he had a commander from hell. I mean, as a matter of fact, leadership lessons and Army leadership lessons came out of this book because we had a commander that was so challenged in the leadership department that he broke every leadership Army value in the book. So that book jumped off the pages of this book, the 4 books. It wrote itself. And then I had colleges want me to do leadership lectures. So I wrote a syllabus for the leadership, and that's Army values. So it's just kind of cycle, it just kind of has grown. I'm up to 12 books, but I have an audio book coming out on Veterans Day. I always release them on key historical dates. I don't call myself a military historian. I'm more of a history geek. So anyway, and my purpose, is because I was the XO of a brigade-sized unit. It was a reinforced battalion. We had 1,000 soldiers, and I was number 2. And I lost 5 soldiers during that year in Iraq. And the reason why I have transcribed all of what we've done there is for their memory, for the memory of my 1,000 soldiers I deployed with, their legacy and my legacy. So that's why I'm here to talk to you. That's why I write these books. Not in it to get rich, get rich quick or any of that business or get famous. I don't care about that. I just care about getting our message out to future generations. And then, and also to learn, because from these lectures I've given I just gave one to a group of 100 people. They're really learning from our mistakes. It was like, was that guy really that bad? It's like, yeah, he was really that bad. And I even write in the leadership book, everybody's worked for a guy like that. And I know if you're in the military, you had a commander or first sergeant like that. It's just nature. It's just human nature. So anyway, so real brief. When I got deployed to Iraq, I was full-time guard officer. Okay. Long story short, I had just lost both parents. And that's how I started Combat Journal story. The first paragraph is, yeah, mom died. And then I go through how that happened. The next page or 2, dad died 60 days later. And it goes, Major Hillcrest, that's how the story starts, and it doesn't get any better for this guy. That's how the whole series opens up. So I try to grab people's attention, but I was in grad school in my own dime at night. Well, tuition assistance, government paid the tuition, but I did it on my own time. Because to get the officer ranks, you got to get higher education, whatever. And so my thesis, I finished it, I came back, I had to stop my studies when I got deployed, come back 2 years later, I was gone 2 years. And I picked up the studies and I did a master's degree in American history. So I did, my thesis basically is a chronology of essays, and reviews, a lot of book reviews in here. So I put it on the shelf. I always said, no, I'm going to publish that someday. Long story short, when I retired in 2016, I got in a couple of veterans support groups, their peer support groups, and I did that on my own. And it wasn't like somebody said, hey, man, you're PTSD or you're suicidal, you're this, that. I just did it on my own. I gravitated to the VA. Don't know how it happened, just did. Long story short, I got in a wait for a Guitar for Vets program. It's a free teaching veteran how to play guitar. Always wanted to play guitar. Took me a year to get in. I got in. I mean, the guitar thing, we're playing and singing and having a good time. One of the guys there, he was a former Navy policeman. I mean, he's kind of a cop kind of guy. He was a tough guy. And he said he wrote a poetry book. This guy, Navy veteran, peer support veteran, poetry. Because I don't know anything about poetry. I don't know anything about fiction. All my stuff is nonfiction. Anyway, he turned me on to a guy named Andreas Kosak, who is the founder of Written by Veterans. And that is a veterans writing support group sponsored by California State University, San Bernardino. You can put, I can put the link in the web. There's dozens of us. We put out anthologies. There's two anthologies we put out with the group collectively doing books. But anyway, Andreas taught me how to edit a book, insert photos, captions, format for Amazon self-publishing. So this was my learning curve. And from that, I went on and did 2 other shorter books, kind of on my own, but with the mentorship guidance of the Written by Veterans. I was a golfer, so I came up with this. And then the essays was kind of easy because I had a bunch of essays. I put them together, a lot of pictures, boom, I got a book. So that was my learning curve. I spent the next year taking a 2,500 page journal I kept in Iraq, going to, coming from, the whole bit. I edited it down to about 1,200 pages in 4 books. And I did that, and they're all out. And then the leadership books came out. And I'm doing a compilation, which is a part 6. And that's going to be a condensed version of the whole journal story. And there's talk of that getting possibly produced into a motion picture. So that's kind of the long and short of things. And then now I'm into teaching veterans how to get involved with writing and publishing, and a couple support groups for that. I'm in 6 writing support groups, and I've got a whole how-to series I started on helping veterans learn how to write and publish. So that's my next thing. And then the final thing I got is the children's books. I figured someday I'm going to run out of military stories. So I started writing a couple of children's books. I've got 2 in the can, and a couple more are going to come. It's Claire the Magical Dog, and it's cute little dogs run around. And I based it on my 2 little dogs and my 2 grandsons. And it's funny how writing works, because it's like John Cole, Marine Corps, Vietnam veteran, infantry, one of my mentors of all time. He's well known, he's a very established author. He's one of my mentors, John Cole. He said his famous line, and I opened up my How to Write book, is there's a story there. Writer, I can see anything, anywhere, and I can create a story out of it. I can write something about it. And that's just me. I don't know. That's John Cole's school of writing, and I'm a disciple of that. I can write about anything. So anyway.
And that's what I mean about you being a prolific writer. You've written a lot. You've spent a lot of time in retirement, kind of writing about your experiences and reflecting on your experiences. And I'm really interested, especially in the how-to books that you have, that we could share with our folks, our veterans, to encourage them to do what you did, which is to take some of that experience that you've lived and turn it into stories that people can learn from. Rich Kensinger, you have been patiently waiting here with your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute. How are you doing, Rich?
I'm doing very well, and it's not Paula.
No,
My
not
wife
Paula.
owned, yeah, it's not Paula, it's Rich. John, I'm a retired clinical psychologist. Now, I served in the Air Force 4 years as an ER medic. So I have this combination of a biopsychosocial approach to combat trauma. So that's what I'm interested in the moment with you. Tell me about losing the first soldier in your unit, and then the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, because I know it impacts everybody in a close, tight network combat unit. So tell me about your reaction as an officer in charge of these soldiers.
Yeah. It's very emotional for me. I write about it in the books. First, KIA, I write about it vividly, my first reaction to what happened. The worst for me are in the Combat Journal 4. I was in command when we lost 2 of those guys. I live with that every day. I write about it, and that's part of my therapy, is getting through it. I had to relive it. I'm okay with it now, but it's difficult for me to read that stuff.
Yeah.
Or obviously to even talk about it. It's that's why I read these books. So her legacy will live on.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and God bless you for your work.
And thank you, Rich. Hey, Brad, did you have a question for Colonel Mack?
Well, I'd just like to rewind. Good evening, John. Great to have you on the show tonight. I was thinking as you were going through all your books, which I have not read one, from a Marine to another Marine, which book would you recommend is a question. But then I go back to a question about why you joined the Marine Corps. And then when you got RIFT, which is reduction in force, how did you feel about leaving the Marines and going to another service? And the last one is, what are you going to be doing on 10 November?
This guy I like. He talks my language. We have this like Marine Corps handshake thing. Well, first of all, the beer flows on the 10th of November. That's just a given. I got so many events backed up over that weekend in the 10th, and but the only thing that matters on the 10th of November is that Marine Corps birthday. And you know, I've been the youngest and I've been the oldest. You know, for the cake cutting and all that. You know, when we go to a ball or to a birthday celebration, I've been the oldest, I've been the youngest at different times. It's pretty funny, but great question. I'll never forget going from Marine Corps to Army, because back then it was before Desert Storm, and I'm sorry, but the Marine Corps, we thought the Army would go. I mean, we just didn't think that they could cut it. In the late 70s, because that's post-Vietnam, the long hair, the marijuana, and all the bullshit. So that's was my interpretation of the Army. Okay, so I was very apprehensive. One good thing is I went into a cavalry unit. Well, I got slotted in infantry. They sent me to the cavalry. I ended up back in infantry later, but I went to a cavalry unit, which is the same task organization as a Marine Corps air ground combat team. So I was like in a different uniform, same mission. They had attack helicopters, we had Cobras, we had scouts, infantry scouts, we had mortars, we had cavalry, we had tanks. I mean, it was a Marine Corps. So I was right at home there. And I found that some of the officers there were pretty smart. And I went in a little cocky thinking, man, I'm better than everybody. But eventually I figured it out. And I said, I'm not quite as smart as some of these guys. We had an intel guy who was off the charts. But it was a real cultural learning curve. But after a couple of years getting my feet wet, when I went full time, I mean, what I think really helped me is having an edge. When you're a Marine, enlisted or officer or Mustanger, you have an edge against the other officers in the Army. It's just the way it is. You know what right is. So I always kind of had one up, I felt. I didn't play the political BS, and that's why, it might be a reason why I didn't make general officer. I didn't play the bullshit. I was there for my troops, for the soldiers, and their welfare, and get them back home. And that's all I cared about. I didn't care about making jump stars and all that stuff. And anyway, it's all in my books. I'm not trying to sell books. I don't get rich off self-published books, but I write about all this stuff in my book. And then I have an autobiography I'm going to put out called My Military Life. It'll come out when I get time to release it. Great questions.
Thank you. Semper Fi.
Yes, sir, all the way, sir.
Thank you, Colonel Mack. And I think, John Dank, you have to take off, so we will not be talking with you tonight. Maybe you could join us another time, John, to talk about the linebacker 2 and the gun run in Haiphong Harbor. Looks like John Dank is frozen. Anyhow.
One thing I want to emphasize, like, again, I don't care if you buy books, but I'll put the links in the chat room of the video clips. I really like people to watch those clips because they're produced by CBS and they're professionally done and they've been broadcast out to millions of people. And I really like them to see that because that tells my story.
Put those links in the chat, please.
I'll do that right now.
Don, thank you. And thank you for joining us tonight. And I hope you'll join us again. And I think we'll be talking.
I mentioned to your editor, she has the 4 combat journal books and she did the 1, which she did an excellent job. You guys still have 3 other ones that if you ever need to insert in the future publication, please, you have my blessing. You have the book, she has the books and Word doc. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate that offer. That's terrific. Bob Flage, you're with us tonight. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing very good, thank you.
Vietnam veteran, Mobile Riverine Force. Bob, you live in Jacksonville, Florida. You shared a story with me that I think would be good for you to share with others tonight.
Wonderful. I'd really like to do that. September 12th, this past September 12th, we had a real moving and emotional event in Jacksonville at the North Florida National Cemetery, as a second lieutenant, Alfred J. Hamway, was laid to rest with full military honors. Lieutenant Hamway was a Jacksonville resident, born in July 19, 1920, and he enlisted in the Army on September 12, 1944. And upon entering the service, he became a pilot and was a member of the 360th Bomb Group, flying a Douglas A-20G Havoc out of the present-day Papua New Guinea area. His aircraft was shot down January 20th, 1945, near Cape Wom, and was reported as missing. American grave registration, searched for him, and in 48, and they couldn't locate, and they listed him as remains unrecoverable, non-recoverable in 49. Fast forward to December 2011, an Australian defense officer reported seeing an aircraft crash site, and a local guide from the nearby Guam village had discovered the site 6 months earlier and said human remains were at the site. The Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency conducted investigations in 2015 and 16, and finally in 2022 recovered remains that were identified as Alfred Hamway. This recovery illustrates how this country never gives up with attempting to locate, our missing. The interesting thing is he was buried 80 days to the date of his enlistment. So may he rest in peace at this point. It was really gratifying. He does not have any immediate family left, but there were nieces and nephews that were there at the burial. So he's now enshrined with us in the National Cemetery.
Bob, somebody who's not connected to the military might wonder why you feel such a connection to this man who was killed 80 years ago, whose remains have been discovered, brought back. You obviously feel a connection with him, and this is a meaningful ceremony.
Yes,
could you put it in words?
He was a Jacksonville resident. He graduated from Andrew Jackson High School. It's the oldest high school in Jacksonville. And, the Patriot Riders, Military Order, the Purple Heart, etc., recognized him at the burial. And, it was, like I said, really moving that, he came home.
I'm asking you these questions, I think, because I one of my missions in life is to try and explain it to other people, try and explain it as, to young people who may not have an understanding of why Memorial Day is important, or why we, spend so much time and energy and money and expertise to find remains, to bring them back. Why is this important? And it's not self-evident, I think, why it's important. I think we really have to search and consider, reflect upon why this is so important. And it strikes me that when you join the military, you leave the life that you've known. You leave your family, you leave your neighborhood, you leave your friends, you leave your identity of who you were, and you enter the unknown. I mean, we heard Don Nemchek talk about being a 19-year-old and, boarding that ship and going literally halfway around the world. And you kind of become a different person. And when you go halfway around the world, especially, I think you wonder, is anybody going to remember you when you come back? You know, what if you don't come back? What if the world changes while you're gone? What if like everything is going on and you're stuck here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? I think that it causes a degree of anxiety that anybody who joins the military experiences. And the worst nightmare, of course, would be to go to the Pacific and never come home. And
His his brother, who was a captain in the Navy, prior to his dying, he asked his daughter to never forget Alfred, his brother. And so I think that really was the bond that that put the family together.
did you ever wonder when you were in Vietnam if you'd come home?
Did I ever wonder?
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. I was watching one of these YouTube shows that another veteran was talking about, and he and I had pretty much the same type of feelings that no, yeah, I was young and dumb, and nothing was going to happen to me. I saw people in my squad get killed. But no, I never thought about that. I guess the only picture I had in my mind was, when I left to go to San Francisco, was seeing my mother, outside of our airport. They had no security. She was standing outside of a fence where the aircraft was, and I could see her face. I can still see her face in the yellow flower dress that she was wearing, and that that I kept in my mind the whole time, but I never really thought about that. No.
But now that you're older and wiser, you understand that you might have been, instead of the other person in your squad who didn't come home, that might have been you.
Well, thinking back, I can think of 6 or 7 periods or events that I shouldn't have survived, and it was just just by luck of nature that I did.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you for sharing that story.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for letting me share it.
This is open conversation, so I do invite you to, bring something up, ask a question. I do. John Dank was gonna talk about his ship and the USS Goldsboro. And the last three, I believe these are, and I want to look into this, is one of the things I wanted to talk to John about. I believe that he saw the last three Navy sailors who died in the Vietnam War get killed. And I'm pretty sure they died on the Goldsboro, but I want to make sure that that's the case. That would have been December 19th, 1972. And I thought maybe I'd write something about that with John's help. But if you have something else that you want to talk about, please do. Yeah.
You mentioned your interest in my how-to books. I've written 3 books on how to start writing, how to write, get published, and how to time the process. But I throw this out to the group, or if you want to put it out in your social media. I spend a lot of my time helping other veterans and veteran family members to start getting into the writing thing, and it's really been therapeutic for a lot of. They've gotten really be able to. They really have gotten a lot of positive feedback from people to be able to work through problems by just writing stuff down, and they don't always have to share it with other people or get published. But just the process of putting thought to paper really is therapeutic.
I'm guessing Jerry Augustine can confirm that that's the case. I think it was the case for him. I know Bob McCormick has been working on writing his story, which I so admire, because it's so hard to do.
Myself out there, if anybody wants assistance, my email's in the chat box. I'd be more than willing to assist.
Thank you very much, John. And I know von Bargen, who's a very fine writer, has written a lot of stories from his career. Jerry Augustine, did writing help you? I can't hear you, Jerry. Dang it. I was going to ask Bill Boswell a question, but I think Bill has left. He put some interesting comments here in the chat. I might have asked Ben Wright to echo them. And this is off the subject of writing. It's more on the subject of the role of the reserves and the National Guard in our military life. Because I think this is a fascinating. So there you are, Bill Boswell, you're back. Let's start with the RIFs, because that's a term that I've heard, of course. Reduction in force. There was a big one after the end of the Cold War and the reduction of the U.S. military from a Cold War stance to whatever we became in between the end of the Cold War and the attacks of 9/11. But John, like your story of just getting that, getting the notice all of a sudden after 10 years, expecting that you're going to have a career, that's devastating. I think I've never quite understood the devastation of that.
Yeah, it was, I even tried to fight it, file an appeal with the Department of Navy appeal. It went nowhere. The Marine Corps is a tight outfit, but God bless the National Guard. And so I was in the chat room. I wasn't able to keep up on the chats while I was talking, but it's true. When I was in Iraq, more than 50. I was in Operation Iraqi Freedom. More than 50%, more than 50% of the fighting force was National Guard and Reserve. You saw patches from all different states all over the place, and they gave us some strategic missions. I had 1,000 guys. We had a motorized infantry battalion. So most of us were in Humvees. We had the first tank company deployed to combat since the Korean War from the National Guard. And that was my guys. So we carried a burden of the fight. We weren't the Rangers kicking in doors in Baghdad, but I had 5 different FOBs we guarded. We did force security missions, and the bullets were real.
That is really interesting. More than 50%. Bill Boswell, could you talk about what you stated here in the chat?
Yeah, we had a sidebar going, a number of us, about what happened in the 90s. And as I mentioned, the Clinton administration decided they wanted to cut the active duty force fairly substantially. I think 50%. Ben, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And that's neither here nor there. But what they did at the same time is they increased the operations tempo. People may remember what happened in the Balkans in the mid-1990s. And all of a sudden it occurred to them that they could not do what they might have done had they still had a large enough active duty force. And as a consequence, they began to use, and I would suggest overuse, the Guard and the Reserve. And God bless them, the Guard and the Reserve responded. But there are long-term consequences to doing that, because if you think you're a part of a strategic reserve, I don't want to say a weekend warrior because it's a lot more than that these days, but if you think you're going to be doing things for a few weeks a year, and all of a sudden you notice that you've been called up for a year, you have to leave your job, you have to leave your family, and the support systems were not in place for the Guard and the Reserve in the same fashion as they were for active duty personnel. And I still don't think we've figured that out. And that's going on 30 years now. Yeah. So I think that's a big problem. When I retired in 1998, I said this at the retirement ceremony. I was asked to give remarks, and I said, this is a big problem we have to deal with. And this is only about 3 years after it started. And it puts an enormous burden on people who, for want of a better term, didn't sign up for that. They were there in the case of a national emergency, and they were there to do their part throughout the year, but not year in and year out. How do you get promoted in your job on the civilian side if you're gone? If your employer can choose between Joe and Jim, and Jim is in the Guard or the Reserve and he's away for a year, you know who's going to get the promotion. And it's tough on families too, because that's, in one respect, not what they signed up for either.
Boy. Bill, I had, and this is not somebody that any of you know, it's not somebody I know well. He is he hires for a company, and he's a veteran. He's a veteran. And he said, I would not hire somebody in the reserves.
And it's a real problem. It may be illegal to make decisions that way, but as a practical matter, if you have someone who is likely to be gone when you need him or her, as the case may be, you can find some way, at least in your own mind, of justifying that decision and probably withstand a legal challenge. But it tosses a great deal on the individual. And I really don't think the government has responded terribly well to that situation, partially because they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's bad for recruiting. Bill, great points. I got to tell you, you took the words right out of my mouth. In my comment essay I open my books with a quote and close with a quote, and I make up original quotes. Here's my quote on Comment Journal Part 4, okay? We aren't your weekend warriors anymore. 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer, my ass.
Very eloquent there, John. But yeah, when my dad was in the Army Reserve and he was doing, in the 1950s and 1960s, he would show up for his weekend duty, his drill weekend, and the sergeant in charge would say, "Sit there, don't touch anything," all weekend. I mean, it really was expected not to do much. And those days are long gone. I don't know how people like Dave Seaver, who spent a career in the reserves, how they do it, how they balance, their work, their family, and their duty in the military.
And they're held to the same standards as the active duty personnel.
Yes, they are. I'm going to go to Ben Wright. Ben, you have a lot of knowledge about this also.
Yeah, it was interesting. Well, part we talked about in the chat was this concept of total force, of the active, and like say in wartime, then you activate the reserve and guard. And there was a lot of heartburn because the reserve and guard was not used during Vietnam to only a minor extent. So it was a big political deal for people to fill up in reserve and guard to avoid the draft. And there was a lot of heartburn because of that. And it was one of the criticisms of Vietnam that you sent these young draftees with no training instead of people that were already trained, which greatly contributed to the casualty rate. But then when they went to all volunteer force in 1972, they had no choice but to start activating the Guard and Reserve. And the people I know now, like Dave Seaver, he can tell you the training requirements are amazing. Of course, I flew in the Air Force, and I've worked with some reserve pilots who were dual qualified in other aircraft and had tremendous amounts of flying experience. But yet, do it, and they're still trying to work the scheduling issue. Air Mobility Command and the airlines are still negotiating because airlines say, "Look, if you're going to deploy these people, tell us when you're going to deploy them, and give us, 2-3 years or whatever we can work out that we know that we can depend on scheduling, that you're not going to deploy them." And then of course, the military balks at that, but that's a real issue. And of course, wartime is activate the Civil Reserve Air Fleet to meet all the requirements, and it's being used now to take stuff to Ukraine and Israel. If it was an all-out war, and all these airline pilots are now expected to leave the airlines and go fly with the craft, the Civil Air Reserve Fleet, or with the Reserve or Guard, things are going to really get tight.
Bob Von Bargen.
Yeah, Ben, you're absolutely right. But I go even further. I'd say the weekend warrior bit, so far as the Air Force Reserve and the Air Guard is concerned, and other services followed on afterwards. But that goes back into the 1960s. I was an Air Reserve technician at the 9/11 in Pittsburgh, and we had airplanes that out flying the line to Vietnam, the C-124s, regularly. We had there were times we have 5 or 6 crews out at one time, the problem that we have here is that, as I put in the chat, is that I know the folks out here at the McGuire at the Joint Base McGuire Dick Lakehurst. Those people they're going at 100. I used to say we ran at 102%. Those guys are running at 120%.
Yeah.
And what's happening is you push this so far, you're going to destroy the reserve and guard system. They really have to be careful.
And this stress on the Guard and Reserve system has been going on for 30 years.
Well, let me tell you, when I was flying the 141, I had a full-time, demanding civilian job. I flew every weekend. I flew 3 weekends a month from McGuire either up to Thule, Greenland, or to Frankfurt. And on Wednesday nights, I went out and dropped troops locally in order to maintain qualifications. When I was at Pittsburgh, all of the Army's paratroop training was done by the Air Force Reserve.
Bob, the strain that must have put on your family.
I have a wonderful wife.
Yeah. Dave Seaver.
Boy, I don't even know where to start with all this, having spent my career in the reserve. So I'll start with COVID. 6 of my squadron mates got a call Saturday night and had to be at the base Sunday morning, and they were in New York City Sunday night. That's how quickly they had to spin up and go. They tell you, well, you got 72 out. Well,
yeah.
No, and the other thing is training. The last few years of my career, I was a lead OCT for a lot of exercises, and it just amazed me. I felt very.
What's OCT?
Observer, controller, trainer. So we're the ones who go and, help run these exercises and train the units that come. I felt very fortunate to be in the 911th, the squadron I was in out there, the aeromedical staging squadron, because we had equipment. We have an aeromedical evacuation squadron there that we can work with. We have aircraft. Last summer, I was, my last exercise up there at Youngstown, we had an aeromedical staging squadron, and the whole idea of these exercises is you're thrown into a contingency environment. The plane comes in, it drops off all your stuff, and you literally have to build everything from ground up. Well, the lead unit there, the lead squadron there, they don't have tents to practice with. So they had no idea what to do when it came to even building the tents that they needed to have their facility. The unit out in Phoenix at Luke Air Force Base, why is there what is basically an Air Mobility Command asset sitting on an Air Combat Command base where they have nothing to work with? And the money trickles down through active duty. So that's kind of what makes it difficult. But yeah, we still have the same requirements. We just have a lot less time to do them in. So we refer to it as competing priorities. So, you may have to let something go this month because that thing over there takes priority this month. And you hope you can get to it next month. It's frustrating.
I can't imagine. And again, you have a very understanding family, and I presume employer also, correct?
Yes. I work for UPMC, and they have always been very good about me going, because I went into New York City in the second wave, and initially I'd volunteered, but but a few days after the initial group went in, I got the phone call that it was now a voluntold and just be ready to go. So yeah.
Well, I want to get back to this conversation. I do want to acknowledge our sponsors, one of which is UPMC for Life. UPMC for Life can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life is plans designed by veterans for veterans, and we'll be meeting and hearing from the veteran who designed UPMC for Life's plan for veterans at our event at the Rivers Casino on Wednesday. And these plans can save you money and get you more benefits. You can view all your plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. And we're also grateful to our other premier sponsor of our big Rivers Casino event on Wednesday. And that is Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. They're dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about the tobacco hazards, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. You can find out more about what they do at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And I do want to let people know we also have our fall magazine out. If you have not received it in the mail, it's because we don't have your address. Let us know your address. We'll put it in the mail. We send about 10,000 of these out to households nationwide and are always looking to distribute them further because this is how people find out about the Veterans Breakfast Club. We hand distribute about 7,000 of these. So we do still have some boxes left in my garage. If you would like one magazine or more, just let me know and we will put it in the mail to you, again, free of charge. All right, let's get on with this conversation. Who else has their hand up here? Oh, Colonel Mack.
Yeah, in my, again, they did a great job with this article. Your editor is spot on. She's a pro. And great job editing my book in your quarterly magazine.
That'd
Talking
be
about
Daria Summers.
What's that?
I said that would be Daria Summers.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, she is amazing.
I'm like her #1 fan now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I write a lot about what we're talking about, reserve component. Everything you want to know about National Guard reserve component, going to war, coming back home, the family, the stress, they're in my books. I write in detail. The 4 books are painstaking detail, down to what we had for breakfast, the meetings, the what. So just to give you an idea, when we got the call for active duty, I was active Guard reserve. So you have a small staff of active duty HERs that run a battalion. We had 1,000 guys. I had about 25 active people working full time. I literally worked when we first got alerted. And then you go to SRP, soldier readiness processing, all that, and your paperwork. From that time to the point where we mobilized, it was about. I worked 7 days a week, and I worked. I never saw the sun. I was there all day, all night, and came home. So like the family said, you were deployed for 2 years because the 4 or 5 months before you deployed, you were gone 7 days of the week, and then we deployed for the it was a 1.5-year deployment, and then coming back in a couple of months. So I literally, other than we got a 15-day pass, I didn't get a day off for 2 years. To give an idea on how taxed the National Guard and Reserve can be. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that was just the way it was. When I came back, I was, again, returned to full-time status, which is Title 32 versus Title 10 federal. My sergeant, there was a USR, which is unit status report is due. Active duty units have to do it every 30 days. Reserve components like every quarter. Well, the USR goes to Washington, D.C., was due when we came back. There's nobody there to do it. So long story short, the sergeant major and me, we came in literally after 2 years, we had a 3-day pass and we were back to work. So to give you an idea of how they work the Guard.
Dave McComb,
Yes.
How are you, Dave?
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Well, I try to most times on Mondays.
Yes, and I like seeing you at our breakfast in Bethel Park, but it's good to see you on Zoom also. You put here in the chat that you were in reserve while in college.
Right.
But when you reported for active duty, you were treated terribly.
Yeah. There was a couple of people in the ops group, and there was especially a second class, and I guess he felt threatened by me, and he used to always try to show me up how many, he would act like I was a skivvy waiver. So he acted like he could read flashing light and all that quicker. And I told him it doesn't matter, you're supposed to sacrifice speed for reliability. So I said, I don't care how fast he can send, or how fast he can read it. You have to get down to that level. And he used to always give me trouble. But then the chief, all of a sudden, I took the exam, got promoted, and the chief turned around and sent him to the mess decks and put me in charge of the signal bridge. So, and then, of course, when you went to NOM, that's when you're under pressure. Like some of these guys have said, we had to do the same books, we had to do everything, but we had to do it like without having hands on. And I think they resented it. But once we got in action, we got up to speed real fast.
You used the term you were a skivvy waiver?
Yeah, that's I was a signalman. That's what they call skivvy waivers. You have flags, semaphore flags.
Yeah.
They always call you skivvy waiver. And then
I love that.
and then when we sailed for Nam, we were undermanned. A lot of people jumped ship. I don't know why, but anyway. So I did work in the radio, radio room too. I did work in there, and I was going to tell you that at our meetings. My first couple years after I got out of the Navy, nobody ever talked to me in my dreams. They always were did it, da it, like going down the hallway. You practice Morse code. So I dreamt, and it was no talking. It was just Morse code, beat dits and das for a long time.
You dreamt in Morse code. Oh my gosh, I could picture that. Oh, but you bring something up. Okay, so Vietnam, my students, I would teach a course on the history of the Vietnam War at a branch campus of Penn State here. And, I was teaching in the mid-aughts, so the, mid-2000s while the Iraq War and Afghanistan wars were going on. And the students would always just be completely bewildered. Why weren't the reserve and guard called up to fight in Vietnam? Why did they rely on these draftees? And I tried to explain it, and I found that I didn't really have a great explanation. I mean, it was a political thing. Ben, you mentioned it about heartburn. This was a political thing. What were the politics of mobilizing the Guard and Reserve for the Vietnam War? What was the political? What politics were behind the decision not to mobilize the Guard and Reserve for war in Vietnam?
Well, part of it was because governors have a lot of control over the Guard and arguing with the U.S. government. And then, in the reserves, it's like, we can't do that. It was easier to just draft people and keep running them through the mill. I mean, I think they just went, the cheapest, easiest way to go with the draft, but they ruffled a lot of feathers doing it.
Yeah. And they did, but it was easier, which is striking to me, that the draft was easier to pull off politically, less costly politically to pull off than calling up Guard and Reserve, which these units had more political weight. There would have been a lot more protests from them to the president and the Congress.
There would have been. And I'd like to make a comment. We talked about reduction in force. There was actually a RIF in the late 70s. It was nowhere near the size of the 90s, but you saw some very strange things happen. An officer who was RIF'd, it didn't happen in the Marines. It didn't happen much in the Army, but it was a fair amount in the Air Force. What they could do is, say they were a captain or a major, they would enlist for 1 and 2 enlistments to finish 20 years, and they would retire at the highest rank they ever held. So you would come across a buck sergeant or a staff sergeant that retired as a captain or a major after serving 20 years. And it was quite a transition, and you'd see some funny things. I never will forget, I flew in to Bergstrom Air Force Base, Texas one time with a student pilot. We go in and get our weather briefing. We get a weather briefing from a staff sergeant wearing master navigator wings. And then we go out to file the flight plan, and the dispatcher in base ops there was wearing senior pilot wings, and he was an airman first, which means he got busted after he enlisted. But you saw some interesting, but there were people, you have 16 years in, hey, I can go do a 4-year enlistment and still get my retirement, even though I've been RIF'd. So you saw some strange things happen.
How remarkable. Oh my gosh. I can't believe that you would get RIF'd at like 15 or 16 years.
Yeah, they did it.
Right.
Wow.
It's not until the 18-year lock-in that it's actually kicks in. 18-year, you're locked in.
18 years. Okay. It's like tenure or something. You can't.
I call that in the Guard too. If you got passed over for like major, lieutenant colonel, or the guys that had that much time in, they revert to enlisted and finish your 20.
Boy, this is interesting. The world of the Guard and Reserve. We should do a whole program just about that.
Yeah. What I'm glad that other participants have brought up is the family aspect, because, you know, when we were on active duty at 29 Palms, we lived on post. It was like a whole city on that post. You know, you had the mayor, so you had your friends, you had your social networks, you had support. National Guard. California, you see how big California is. California, Texas, I think Pennsylvania have the largest National Guard units in the country. 25,000 members all over you know, Sacramento, San Diego. I mean, how are you connecting with other family members for support? You know, it's just real challenge with the Guard Reserve.
Absolutely. I live in Western Pennsylvania. Here in Pittsburgh, we don't have an active duty base. We have a lot of Guard and Reserve around, and they're like Dave Seaver. These are people and families who are filtered in to neighborhoods and communities throughout the region. And many of their neighbors, you know, have no experience with the military, have no idea why is this guy always, you know, leaving every other weekend? Why is he, you know, which job does he have? Why is he wearing a uniform sometime and sometimes not? It's interesting. I think it can be a lonely experience for Guard and Reserve.
A lot of demands put on the Reserve and Guard to do a career, juggling your civilian job and keeping that job, and all the BS they put up with. And, you know, people get fired for this stuff, and they won't say you're being fired because you're in the Reserve. They'll find another reason.
Oh, they'll find another reason. Absolutely.
The time consumption. It's not one weekend a month, 2 weeks.
No.
You got dark night. You have meetings every month. You got to go after work at night to do your meetings for planning for the drill. You have advanced parties before a drill weekend. Somebody's got to go set up. You know, I mean, there's so much burden put on those poor people.
And there's a lot of testing. You know, you have to take exams online. I've heard, you know, get qualified or certified. There's a lot of PT, you know, things that you have to pass. Jim Puhala.
Yeah, you know, at the end of the Vietnam War, the Army ended up with a whole bunch more helicopter pilots than they needed, many of whom were warrant officers. So there was the RIF in the mid-70s was disproportionately warrant officers. And the warrant officers who got riffed ended up being the foundation of the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association. So the VHPA, which, you know, has met annually for the last, I don't know, 50 years or whatever, is primarily riffed warrant officers. But I think it was in the early 90s. I was vacationing with my family at Rehoboth Beach, and I was with my grandkids at a park. And a guy walks up to me and he saw my license plate and saw that I was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And he wanted to complain to me how he'd gotten riffed. So it stayed with these guys.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It was a traumatic experience for them.
Did you have any thought of staying in after Vietnam?
No, I was so glad to get out. I told my story. I barely survived my one tour in Vietnam. I had no desire to go back and do that again.
Right. Absolutely. Bob Flage, you were going to add to the conversation here?
Yes, sir. 67, 68, my platoon, well, my whole company was really small. We were a combat support company. And when they created the Mobile Riverine Force, they took all the toys away. I was in a recon platoon, and they made us a straight leg. And but over 2/3, maybe 3/4 of our company, they were all draftees. You know, they were, most of them were what do you call it, replacements. Our senior NCOs were, you know, they were RAs, you know, and we had, you know, the butter bars were just out of college. They, you know, I had 2 platoon leaders come to me and say, "Tell me what's going on. You keep doing what you're doing. I'll catch on." The first one, he lasted 2 weeks and got shot in the head, and that was it. But in the National Guard, I spent 18 years in the Florida Army National Guard, and we were weekend warriors for about probably 10 years. Then when we started getting some serious helicopters, we started with Rucker training birds with day glow orange tails, and then we ended up flying up to Massachusetts and Maryland. I'm sorry, Rhode Island and Maryland, and got Mike bottles, and then we ended up getting Apaches. At the end, when I got out, we were flying Apaches, and that made the whole trip worthwhile. But we were drilling a month at a time. We would fly out to Fort Hood, Texas, for our C1 rating, combat rating, to get qualified. Unfortunately, I got out in '93, so I missed. I ended up missing the good stuff at that point.
What was the good stuff?
Well, they ended up at the 111th Attack Helicopter Battalion got activated. We were National Guard. We went to Iraq. I say we. They went to Iraq. I just got out too soon. I should have stayed and would have gone with the rest of the guys. But that was we had no losses, no choppers going down. It was 100% safety. We've had 2 choppers in 25 years ago down. One was a pilot error, and one was a 42-degree gearbox that fatigued. That was my bird that went down. And
Boy. So, Bob von Bargen, were you going to say something? Your hand is up.
I just wanted to put a note on, perhaps a little humorous note on this year when they kept giving us more and more work. I was at a meeting at Headquarters Air Force Reserve, Dobbins Air Force Base. And so at the meeting, they kept saying, well, you got to do more with less. You have to do more with less. Well, this major, who was a operations officer in one of the real deep South wings, he stands up and he says, well, sir, he says, I tell you what, he says, you keep telling us we got to do more with less. I'm here to tell you that I'm getting so good at it that I'm going to be able to do everything with nothing. And then he sat down.
That's great. Thank you for that injection of humor, Bob. Dave Seaver.
Yeah, one of the struggles you also have in the reserve is, you deploy, you go on annual tour, is, active duty thinks you're not competent and they don't respect you very well. My first deployment, I was a first lieutenant, so I was just learning. Second deployment, get to Afghanistan. I'm now a captain. I've deployed, I've trained, and the vast majority of my crew were active duty people that they had pulled out of Air Force hospitals, sent them to a 5-day training at Camp Bullis, and they're like, okay, now you know how to do this. Go get them, Tiger. No. So, just the fact that, so that was pretty easy earning their respect, just the fact that I was experienced and knew what I was doing. Then New York City. That was all reservists, medical people that went there. There were no active duty people there. The president called up 3,000 of us and sent us to New York City. Probably because, I don't know, that's what we do in civilian life too. So just maybe we're competent. Qatar, that was the tough one. I'm an aeromedical staging guy. They stuff me in the med group and make me the medical operations flight commander. And this was kind of comical. One of my physicians was an academy grad, went to med school, ER doc, lieutenant colonel, just like me, and this dadgum reservist was his boss. And if you think that didn't rub him the wrong way, Then I get to Alabama for ROTC field training. I'm the med group commander. I'm the only reservist group commander there. So, and I would readily admit when we oriented the cadets that, hey, I'm the reservist in the room, but I'm here for a reason because this is my job. This is what I do.
Yeah.
So it's tough to do that. You have to go out there and you have to work hard and earn it. I was doing 12, 14-hour days in Qatar, and that was before Allies Refuge hit. After that, it was 20-hour days for 3 weeks. But, I was part of being a leader is you take care of the people under you. And that's what I was doing, making sure they got where they needed to be. They got fed. They had what they needed to do their job, etc. So you do that, but that's how you earn their respect.
Dave, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm looking at the clock. We have just 5 minutes left in the program. And one of the things that I wanted to get to before we ended was this tension. Is there a tension between active duty and reserve? What's the nature of it? How do you respond to it? Is it just inevitable that there's going to be that kind of rivalry, I guess? And I think you've addressed some of that right here. So thank you. The other thing is, if Mary Klepper is still on, she mentioned in the chat here that there is a National Guard museum in Washington, D.C. Mary.
Yes.
That's fantastic. I've never heard of it.
It's amazing. It's right near the National Postal Museum. It is wonderful. I popped in there thinking I'd be in there a half hour, and like 3 hours later, I moseyed my way out. And it's the history of the Guard from the inception of the country all the way through. And when you get to the 9/11 area, they've got a piece of the Pentagon and a piece of the World Trade Centers you can touch. It's very emotional.
That's so neat.
It's a fantastic museum. I remember posting about it on Facebook. I'll send you the link, and you can see some of the pictures. It's phenomenal. If you live in this area, it's a great visit.
Or should the Veterans Breakfast Club do a bus trip to Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think they should.
Okay. All right. That would be fantastic.
One of many things to check out, of course, the new Army Museum and the updates to the Marine Corps Museum, and then the new Navy Museum coming. So.
Yeah, and when is the new Navy Museum?
Part of it is open, I believe. Let me check real quick. Somebody was hitting me up about that the other day, and I said I think part of it's open already. And I just saw your trip to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and if it wasn't during tax season, I'd be all over that.
Yes, we're doing 4 nights in New Orleans.
Yes,
World War II Museum. Last time we were there was 2019. I talked to somebody at the museum, and I just said, hey, we've done 2 trips to the World War II Museum, one in 2012, one in 2019. What is new at the World War II Museum? And we're considering another one. Okay. Oh my God, they have a whole new pavilion. I can't believe.
I know, it's unreal. So as far as I can see from this, it looks like it's open. I mean, maybe not like an official opening, but I think the Navy Museum is open. So another one you might want to consider, I don't know, Todd, it's not that far. The War Museum in Ottawa, Canada's history, which I don't even think about when I think about the military, but that museum is absolutely fantastic. I spent probably 5.5 hours there, and I didn't finish World War II from their inception to World War II. And their big thing, of course, is World War I. They were decimated like the French, but that museum is fantastic with their unknown soldier and but Vimy Ridge, of course, and it's a wonderful museum. And they have a whole bit on Vietnam even too, because some of their men came to enlist here.
Mary, we happen to have a Canadian on the Zoom call tonight.
Is Scott here?
Yes, Scott is here. Scott,
tell me, Scott, isn't that a great museum?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Fantastic.
I've been to Ottawa, I don't know, probably every year for the last 20 years, and I always go there with friends. When I got the Governor General's and Prime Minister's Award and all that, they do the ceremonies there. It's a fantastic place to go.
It's a great city. But that museum, I mean, it's very eye-opening. Very, if you don't know a lot about Canadian military history, it's very eye-opening, and it's very, very well done.
Yeah, Todd, if you bring up the group, maybe I can get you in with the Prime Minister, whoever that is.
Very good. It's a deal. That's a deal.
I want in on that, and some beaver tail.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. What a wonderful conversation we always have. This was just what the doctor ordered for me. Tomorrow we've got Election Day. Thursday night we've got Wednesday we've got a big event here in Pittsburgh. And then Thursday night, we're back with Greatest Generation Live, talking about navigation in World War II. I hope to see you again soon. And thank you to Colonel Mack for joining us. Thank you, CB Donn. Thank you for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you later this week. Take care.